Before we begin tonight's journey into the ancient world of the Anunnaki, I'd like to take a moment to connect with you. Tell me, which country are you listening from tonight? I love seeing how our circle of listeners stretches across the world, different lands, different skies, yet all sharing this same moment together. And how was your day? Was it peaceful and kind to you, or did it test your patience and strength? Whatever happened, you've made it here. This is your time now, no deadlines, no noise, no weight from the world outside. So, take a deep breath with me. Feel your chest rise and slowly let the air go. Let the worries of the day drift away like sand in the desert wind. Now we'll step back in time, thousands of years, where the rivers of Mesopotamia nourished the first cities, and the great Anunnaki walked among mortals. The night is quiet, the story is ready. Let us begin. The land before time had no name, only an endless stretch of dark waters that moved without wind or current. From these waters came the first stirring of thought, a quiet intention, and from intention came being. Two great powers emerged, each unlike the other but bound together. One was Apsu, the fresh and pure waters, steady and calm. The other was Tiamat, the deep salt seas, ancient and ever-shifting. They moved together in a slow dance of creation, their mingling giving birth to the first whispers of life. Where Apsu's clear waters touched Tiamat's endless depths, the first gods were born. They were not yet like the Anunnaki, who would later shape the world, but rather formless powers, pure energies given shape by the will of their parents. They grew in number, learning the patterns of the waters and the hidden laws of the cosmos. From them came the next generation, Anu, Enlil, Enki, and others whose names would echo through ages. In those early days there was no earth, no sky, no people. The universe was a house without walls, an open space where the gods moved freely. Yet with growth came noise. The younger gods laughed, argued, and worked their powers, their sounds disturbing Apsu's stillness. The old god grew weary of the constant activity. He longed for silence, for the deep and undisturbed rest of the beginning. Tiamat, though vast and powerful, loved her children's vitality, and she resisted Apsu's thoughts of ending them. But Apsu's patience was thin. In secret council, he spoke of destroying the younger gods, ending their noisy work before it grew beyond control. Word of his plan reached Ea, later known as Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh-flowing water. He, with a mind sharp as sunlight on a river's edge, saw the danger. He worked in secrecy, using spells of sleep and binding, until Apsu lay still and powerless. With Apsu gone, Ea claimed the deep places as his own dwelling, building a great house upon the waters, a place of learning, magic, and counsel. It was there, in the still waters of the underworld, that Ea took a bride. Her name was Damkina, bright as the first dawn. Their union was not like mortal joining. It was a weaving of currents, the mingling of power and essence, the binding of two streams into one river. From their sacred union came Marduk, a child of immense strength and vision. His eyes shone like twin stars, and in his limbs was the energy of creation itself. Tiamat grieved for Apsu, but did not yet rise in anger. She drifted in her great body of waters, watching the generations grow. But her heart began to turn when the younger gods, emboldened by Ea's victory, stirred the universe with greater force. They built realms, shaped winds, set fires in the heavens. They had no fear of her, and this pride weighed on her spirit. Whispers came to her from strange corners of the deep, voices urging vengeance, voices of the elder powers who had hidden when Ea rose. Chief among them was Kingu, a mighty figure, proud and fierce. He came close to Tiamat, speaking to her in tones both tender and sharp. He reminded her of the stillness she once knew, and of the wrong done by Ea. In the shadowed currents their forms moved together, a meeting of ancient tides. Their closeness stirred the waters, and in that joining Kingu became not only her consort, but her champion. Tiamat called forth her strength and began to fashion an army. From the raw stuff of chaos, she shaped creatures beyond imagining, serpents with bodies of flame, fish with iron scales, dragons whose breath was poison. Each one she blessed with the salt of her own being, giving them a fragment of her will. At the head of this host, she placed Kingu, hanging around his neck the tablet of destinies, a symbol of supreme power that gave the bearer authority over all decree. The younger gods heard of Tiamat's rising wrath. Fear spread among them, for they knew her strength was greater than theirs. Ea himself was troubled, and though his mind was filled with craft and cunning, he could not see a path to victory. He went to Anu, the Sky Father, but even Anu's courage faltered before the thought of facing the mother of all. It was then that Marduk stepped forward. He was young, but his power was unmatched. His voice was steady, his eyes bright with purpose. He offered to face Tiamat, but with a price, that if he won, he would become the leader of the gods, ruling the heavens and the earth. Desperation left them little choice. They agreed, placing their trust in Marduk's strength. Before facing Tiamat, Marduk prepared weapons unlike any before. He fashioned a great net to entangle her, a bow of enormous size, and arrows tipped with the wind itself. He called upon the four winds and trapped them in his net, so they would aid him in battle. When all was ready, he stepped into his war chariot, drawn by storm-born steeds whose bodies glimmered like bronze. The seas roared as Marduk approached. Tiamat rose, towering like a mountain of water, her voice rolling like thunder across the deep. The creatures she had made gathered at her side, their eyes like burning coals. Kingu stood before them, the tablet of destinies shining at his chest. The battle began with a clash of powers that shook the foundations of the universe. Marduk loosed the winds from his net, and they rushed into Tiamat's open mouth, holding it wide. He drew his bow and shot an arrow that pierced her heart, the force tearing her vast body apart. The seas trembled, and her creatures cried out, scattering into the deep. From her fallen form, Marduk began the work of shaping the world. He split her body into two great halves. One half he stretched into the heavens, setting the stars in their places and marking paths for the moon and sun. The other half became the earth, solid and fertile, resting upon the waters below. The rivers flowed from her eyes, and from her ribs rose mountains. Her blood seeped into the land, giving it life. Kingu was taken prisoner, the tablet of destinies removed from his chest. From his blood, mixed with clay, Marduk fashioned the first humans. They were made to serve the gods, to keep their temples, to offer them food and praise. Thus the Anunnaki, the great assembly of gods, had workers to tend to the tasks of the new world. But in those early days, humans were few, and the gods themselves walked among them. The Anunnaki moved across the fresh lands, shaping rivers, guiding the growth of plants, teaching humankind the ways of farming, building, and worship. The gods took pleasure in the company of these new beings, and sometimes they chose companions from among them. Such unions were not the clumsy bonds of mortal flesh, but the meeting of divine spirit and living clay. When a god loved a mortal, the sky seemed warmer, the rivers clearer, and the earth more fertile. Children from such unions carried the strength of both worlds, and many became kings, heroes, and sages. As the first cities rose, Eridu, Nippur, Uruk, the Anunnaki divided their rule. Anu remained in the high heavens, the great overseer. Enlil took command of the winds and the breath of life. He kept the wisdom of the deep and the laws of magic. Inanna, bright and fierce, took joy in beauty, love, and the stirrings of desire among both gods and humans. Her steps across the land were like the opening of flowers in spring, and wherever she touched, hearts turned toward one another. It was an age of beginnings when each season seemed the first, and each river the longest. The memory of Tiamat's wrath still lived in the hearts of the gods, a reminder that even they could be challenged. Yet, for a time, the world was in balance. The gods sat in council, the humans brought offerings, and the earth yielded grain, flocks, and fruit. Night followed day, the stars kept their appointed paths, and the rivers carried the lifeblood of the land to the farthest fields. But peace among gods is never eternal. Ambition and pride, like slow rivers, carve paths that can split the land. In the quiet spaces between festivals and offerings, the first shadows of discontent began to stir again, and the story of the Anunnaki would move toward trials yet to come. The world was new and fresh, the air was warm, the rivers flowed strong, and the fields were rich. The gods looked over everything they had made, and they felt proud. The humans they created worked hard, bringing food and gifts to the temples. In return, the gods taught them how to farm, how to build houses, and how to honor the powers of the earth and sky. In those days, the gods often walked among people. They could take the form of tall, shining beings or appear as ordinary men and women. Sometimes they stayed in the cities for many days, eating, drinking, and sharing stories. Sometimes they simply passed through like travelers, leaving behind only a blessing or a warning. The Anunnaki were not all the same. Each one had their own nature and their own desires. Anu, the father of the gods, stayed high in the heavens. He was like a king who rarely left his throne, but when he did, the sky shone brighter and storms cleared from his path. Enlil ruled the winds and the breath of life. When he was pleased, the air was cool and gentle. When he was angry, storms tore across the land. Ea, also called Enki, was wise and kind. He loved the flowing waters and knew many secrets about the world. Inanna was beautiful and fierce. She cared for love, passion, and desire, and she often walked among humans to stir their hearts. Humans looked up to the gods, but they also feared them. The gods were powerful, and their moods could change quickly. A happy god could bring rain for crops, but an offended god could send drought or flood. Because of this, humans worked hard to keep the gods pleased. They built large temples from mud brick, decorated them with gold and carvings, and brought fresh food, animals, and drink as offerings. In the city of Eridu, Ea made his home. His temple stood by the edge of the river, where reeds whispered in the wind and fish swam in the deep water. He often came out to speak with the people. He taught them how to dig canals to bring water to their fields. He showed them how to shape clay into pots, how to make boats that could sail across the river, and how to tell the time of year by watching the stars. One day, a group of young women came to the river to wash clothes. He watched from the shade of a palm tree. Among them was a woman named Ubara, whose eyes were bright and curious. She was not afraid to speak her mind, even to strangers. He came forward, taking the shape of a tall man with dark hair. He spoke kindly, asking about her family and her work. Ubara laughed at his questions and told him stories about her life in the city. In time, Ea and Ubara grew close. The gods did not love in the same way as humans, but they could join their essence with a mortal's. When Ea chose her, it was like two streams meeting to form a stronger river. Their union was gentle and filled with a deep warmth. In the seasons that followed, Ubara gave birth to a son named Adapa. He loved this child and gave him wisdom far beyond other men. Adapa grew into a leader among the people, teaching them the ways his father had shown him. Inanna, meanwhile, walked often in the city of Uruk. She loved the noise, the music, and the crowds. People welcomed her with flowers and songs. She would bless young couples so their marriages were full of joy. She would also bless the fields so the earth gave plenty of grain. When Inanna found a mortal she favored, she would draw close to them, speaking in a voice like soft music. Her unions with mortals were celebrated as blessings, for from them came children of great beauty and strength. But not all the gods were content. Some of the younger ones began to feel that humans were too lucky. They saw the people building strong houses, eating well, and living with the favor of the great gods. These jealous gods wanted more offerings for themselves, more temples, and more respect. One such god was Namtar, the messenger of the underworld. He traveled between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, carrying messages for Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. Namtar saw that the living were full of joy while the dead had only shadows. Bitterness grew in him. He began to whisper to other gods, suggesting that humans should be made to suffer more so they would offer greater sacrifices. At first, his words found little support. The elder gods remembered the reason humans were made, to serve but also to thrive, so the temples would be full of life and praise. But Namtar's whispers reached Enlil during a time when he was displeased. The humans of one city had failed to give proper offerings after a good harvest, and Enlil's pride was hurt. He began to wonder if the humans had grown too bold. One evening, Enlil called the Anunnaki to a council. They gathered in the great hall of Nippur, a temple so tall it seemed to touch the sky. Torches burned along the walls, and the smell of incense filled the air. Enlil spoke of the people's growing pride and lack of respect. Namtar stood at his side, fanning the flames of complaint. He spoke against punishing the humans too harshly. He reminded them that people were still young and learning, but others agreed with Enlil. They decided that the humans would face trials to remind them of their place. The first trial was drought. Enlil held back the rains and the rivers shrank. The fields turned brown and food became scarce. The people came to the temples, bringing what little they had, begging the gods for mercy. Some blamed themselves for making the gods angry. Others blamed the gods for being unfair. Seeing the people suffer, Ea felt pity. Without telling the others, he sent secret streams of water to certain fields so that some crops would survive. He whispered to a few wise farmers where to dig wells. Slowly, the people of those areas shared food with their neighbors, and the famine eased. Enlil saw this and grew angry at Ea for undoing the trial. The two gods argued, their voices like thunder across the heavens. But before the quarrel could grow worse, Anu called for peace. He reminded them that the balance between gods and humans must be kept, not too much suffering and not too much ease. For a time, things settled again. The rivers flowed, the fields grew green, and the temples filled with offerings. Humans continued to honor the gods, though in their hearts they also learned to rely on one another in hard times. But far away, in the deep places of the underworld, Ereshkigal heard of what had happened. She was queen of the dead, a powerful goddess who rarely came to the surface. Yet she felt the stirrings of change. If humans could survive drought with help from Ea, perhaps they could one day learn to resist all punishments. Ereshkigal decided she would watch closely. Meanwhile, Inanna's fame spread. People from distant lands traveled to Uruk to see her temple. Traders brought fine cloth beads and perfumes as gifts. Music and dancing filled the nights. Inanna took lovers among the gods and among mortals, and from these unions came sons and daughters who became rulers, warriors, and priests. The people saw them as proof that the gods still blessed the world, but jealousy never sleeps long among the gods. Some began to murmur that Inanna gave too much of her power to mortals. Others feared that her children, born of both divine and human blood, might one day rise too high. These fears would, in time, lead to new struggles that would shake both heaven and earth. And so, beneath the beauty and order of the world, the seeds of future trouble were quietly taking root, waiting for the right season to grow. The days in the cities passed in rhythm with the rising sun and the turning stars. Farmers worked the fields, fishermen cast their nets, builders shaped mud bricks, and priests sang the old songs to honor the Anunnaki. The people believed that as long as the gods were pleased, the rivers would flow, the crops would grow, and their children would live long and healthy lives. But far above the earth, the gods continued to watch closely. Some were satisfied with the way humans served them. Others felt uneasy, thinking the people might grow too strong, too clever, or too proud. Among those who felt uneasy was Ninurta, the warrior god and son of Enlil. Ninurta had fought many battles for the Anunnaki, defeating monsters and protecting the lands from chaos. He was loyal to his father, and he shared Enlil's belief that humans needed firm control. One season, news came to the gods about a city far in the east. It was small but rich, with fields of golden grain and herds of fat cattle. The people there had stopped sending offerings to the main temples. Instead, they built their own shrine to a spirit they claimed gave them all their blessings. Enlil saw this as a deep insult. Ninurta offered to deal with the matter himself. He went down to the earth, riding on the storm winds. His presence alone made the people tremble. Ninurta ordered them to destroy their new shrine and return to serving the Anunnaki. But the elders of the city refused. They said their harvests had been plentiful without help from the gods. This angered Ninurta greatly. He struck their fields with scorching winds, and the grain withered. He turned the rivers aside, leaving the land dry. The people soon suffered hunger and thirst, and they finally agreed to return to the old ways. When Ninurta returned to the heavens, Enlil praised him for restoring respect. But Ea was not pleased. He believed that punishing humans so harshly only made them fear the gods, not love them. Ea wanted the bond between gods and humans to be one of trust, not terror. This difference in thinking began to grow into a quiet rivalry between Enlil's side and Ea's side. Inanna, meanwhile, paid little attention to these rivalries. Her mind was on the beauty of the earth, the sweetness of music, and the warmth of love. She traveled often between cities, blessing the people and enjoying the festivals they held in her honor. Inanna loved to see joy in human hearts. She would walk among them dressed in shining clothes, her hair flowing like rivers of gold, and wherever she went, people's eyes lit up. One day, in Uruk, she met a young man named Dumuzi. He was a shepherd with gentle eyes and a strong spirit. The first time Inanna saw him, he was carrying a newborn lamb in his arms, speaking to it softly. Inanna felt a deep affection for him. She began to visit him often, sometimes in the form of a beautiful woman, sometimes as a gentle breeze that stirred the grass around his flocks. Their union was celebrated in Uruk with music, dance, and feasts. The people believed their love would bring good harvests and healthy herds. Inanna and Dumuzi's bond was not just of the body but of the spirit, a joining of divine passion with mortal devotion. From their union came blessings on the land, and for a time Uruk knew only prosperity. But not all unions ended in joy. In other cities, when gods took mortal partners, jealousy sometimes followed. A god might tire of a human lover, leaving them heartbroken, or a mortal might grow proud from divine attention, causing trouble among their own people. Some children born of these unions were gifted, but others were cursed with strange tempers or unending restlessness. The Anunnaki saw these problems and began to argue among themselves about whether they should still walk so freely among humans. Enlil believed they should keep their distance, ruling from afar. He thought the gods should remain close, guiding people's lives directly. Inanna believed love should be free, whether between God and mortal or mortal and mortal. While the gods debated, trouble began to brew in the underworld. Ereshkigal, queen of the dead, had watched the living world for a long time. She saw how Inanna's love brought joy, how Ea's wisdom brought comfort, and how Enlil's power brought fear. Ereshkigal felt that the dead were being forgotten. Few offerings were made to her temple, and the name of the underworld was spoken less and less. This wounded her pride. In the deep halls beneath the earth, she called Namtar, her trusted messenger. She told him to carry a warning to the gods of the living world. The dead must be honored, or the underworld would send its shadow over the land. Namtar flew like a dark wind to the temples, delivering Ereshkigal's words. Some gods took the warning seriously, sending priests to make offerings to the underworld. Others ignored it, thinking Ereshkigal's reach did not extend to their realms. But Inanna heard the message and began to think. She had never been to the underworld, and her curiosity grew. She wondered what Ereshkigal's halls looked like, what shadows lay there, and whether she could gain more power by visiting. Inanna's thoughts about the underworld would, in time, lead to one of the greatest and most dangerous journeys of her life. But before that, other troubles reached the Anunnaki. In the far south, a group of humans began building a great tower. They said it would reach the heavens, so they could speak to the gods directly without needing priests. At first, the gods were amused by the idea. But as the tower grew taller, Enlil saw danger in it. If humans could reach the heavens, they might challenge the gods' authority. Enlil called a council. Ea, Ninurta, Inanna, and others came. They agreed the tower should not be completed, but they disagreed on how to stop it. He wanted to go among the builders and convince them to stop through reason. Enlil wanted to strike the tower down with storms. Inanna suggested simply blessing another city so its fame would outshine the tower's builders. In the end, Enlil acted without waiting. He sent a great storm that shattered the upper walls and scattered the builders. Lightning struck the stones, and rain washed away the mortar. The people, frightened and confused, left the tower half-finished. Some wandered to other lands, starting new towns and speaking in new tongues. This act deepened the divide between Enlil and Ea. Ea saw it as wasteful and cruel. Enlil saw it as necessary to keep order. The two began to avoid one another except in council, and even then their words were short. As the gods quarreled, humans kept living, loving, and working. Some still feared the gods, some loved them, and some began to think that perhaps they could live without them. The Anunnaki watched these changes closely. They knew that as long as humans remembered the old stories and gave offerings, their bond would remain. But if people forgot, the temples would grow silent, and the power of the gods might fade. In the quiet between great events, Inanna prepared for her journey to the underworld, a journey that would change not only her, but the balance between life and death itself. The thought of the underworld stayed in Inanna's mind like a shadow at the edge of light. She had heard the warnings sent by Ereshkigal, but to Inanna, the queen of the dead was not just a figure to fear, she was also a sister by blood. Inanna was queen of love, desire, and life's joys, while Ereshkigal ruled silence, darkness, and the stillness after breath. One ruled the upper world, the other the world below. Inanna wondered if they could meet as equals. She thought of the power she might gain if she could stand in Ereshkigal's hall without bowing. She imagined knowing the secrets of death and returning to tell them to the living. This thought grew into a plan, and the plan became a decision. She told no one of her full intentions. She only said she wished to visit her sister. Before she left, she put on her finest royal clothing and her 7 sacred ornaments. Around her neck, she placed a shining necklace. On her chest, she wore a breastplate of gold. She wrapped herself in a robe embroidered with symbols of the stars. On her head, she set her crown, tall and bright. At her wrists and ankles, she fastened golden rings. In her hand, she carried the measuring rod and line, tools of divine authority. Each item she wore held power, and together they showed her full glory. Inanna called her servant Ninshubur and told her, "If I do not return in 3 days, go to the temples of the great gods and ask for help. Tell Anu, tell Enlil, tell Ea, and do not rest until one of them comes to save me." Ninshubur promised to obey. Then Inanna set out on the road to the underworld. She walked to the great gate that marked the border between the lands of the living and the lands of the dead. The gatekeeper, Neti, looked at her with surprise. Few came willingly to this place, and none who entered without Ereshkigal's summons ever returned. Neti went to tell Ereshkigal that her sister was at the gate. The queen of the dead was sitting on her dark throne, her face pale, her eyes deep with shadow. She felt a stab of anger. She knew Inanna's ways, how she loved to show her beauty, how she enjoyed being adored. Ereshkigal believed Inanna had come to claim part of her realm. Still she told Neti to let her enter, but to follow the laws of the underworld. The underworld had 7 gates, and at each one the visitor was required to give up something of their power. At the first gate, Neti took Inanna's crown. At the second, her necklace. At the third, her breastplate. At the fourth, her robe. At the fifth, her rings. At the sixth, her measuring rod. At the 7th and final gate, the last of her garments. By the time Inanna reached Ereshkigal's throne room, she stood naked, stripped of all her glory. The queen of the dead looked at her with cold eyes. Without her symbols, Inanna was just another soul in the realm of shadows. Ereshkigal did not rise to greet her. Instead, she gave a signal to her judges, the 7 Anunnaki of the underworld. They fixed their gaze on Inanna and pronounced the sentence of death. Inanna's body was turned into a lifeless form, and they hung her on a hook on the wall. Back in the world above, 3 days passed. Ninshubur waited, watching the horizon for her mistress's return. When the 3rd day ended and no one came, she began her task. She went to the temple of Anu, but the sky god said he could not help. She went to Enlil, but the Lord of the Wind said Inanna had chosen her path and must face the result. Finally, she went to Ea. He listened carefully. He knew the laws of the underworld, but he also knew many tricks and secrets. He decided to act. From under his fingernail, he shaped a tiny being called Kurgara, and from the dirt of his skin he made another, called Galatur. They were not human and not divine, small as shadows, but able to slip into places unnoticed. Ea gave them the food and water of life and sent them to Ereshkigal's realm. The 2 small beings passed through the gates easily, for they carried no power to surrender. When they reached Ereshkigal, they found her groaning in pain. She was not only queen, but also a woman in sorrow. She spoke of the burden of ruling the dead, of the weight of grief that never ended. The little beings listened quietly, and when she cried out, they cried out with her. Their sympathy softened her heart. In thanks, Ereshkigal offered to give them a gift. They asked for the body hanging on the wall. Without thinking deeply, she agreed. The beings poured the food and water of life over Inanna's body. Slowly, color returned to her skin, and breath returned to her chest. Inanna stood once more, but the laws of the underworld were clear. No one could leave without sending another in their place. The Anunnaki of the underworld seized Inanna and told her she must choose a soul to remain. With no choice, Inanna began the journey back, escorted by demons of the underworld. As she walked through the cities she once blessed, she saw her people mourning her absence. Some wore sackcloth, some sat in ashes, and their faces were full of grief. She passed them by without harm, but when she reached Uruk, she found Dumuzi sitting on her throne, dressed in fine clothes, not mourning at all. He seemed almost glad to see her gone. Inanna's heart turned cold. She pointed to him and said, "Take him." The demons seized Dumuzi, and he cried out for mercy. His sister, Geshtinanna, begged to take his place for part of the year. Inanna agreed, and so it was decided. Dumuzi would spend half the year in the underworld, and Geshtinanna would spend the other half. This is why the seasons change. When Dumuzi is below, the earth grows dry and bare. When he returns, the fields grow green again. Inanna's journey left its mark on her. She had seen the halls of death and returned alive, something no other god had done. Her power grew, and her fame spread even further. But she also carried a new understanding, that even gods could be brought low, and that life and death were tied together like two halves of the same thread. While Inanna's story filled the cities, Enlil and Ea continued their quiet rivalry. Each gained followers among the gods, and each influenced the humans in their own way. Ea's followers built canals and learned the secrets of writing. Enlil's followers built tall temples and offered great sacrifices. Far away, in the mountains, storms began to grow stronger each year. Some said it was Enlil's doing, others thought it was a sign that the balance of the world was shifting again. But none could guess how soon that balance would be tested in a way that would change the fate of both gods and humans forever. The seasons passed, and the cities of the earth grew larger. In Uruk, in Nippur, in Eridu, and in many lands far from the rivers, the sound of hammers, chisels, and voices filled the air. Farmers turned more land to fields, and traders carried goods along the waterways and across the deserts. The people were many, and their noise rose like a constant hum to the heavens. At first, the gods welcomed this growth. The temples were full of offerings, grain, meat, beer, and fine cloth. Priests sang the old hymns each morning, and incense smoke curled toward the sky. But after a time, the constant noise of human life began to disturb the gods. They could no longer rest easily in their heavenly dwellings. Enlil was the first to speak of this in the council. He said the people were too many, their noise too loud, and their pride too great. If they were allowed to continue, they might forget who gave them life. Some gods agreed with him, remembering past insults or times when offerings had been late. Others, like Ea, argued that humans were meant to fill the earth and that their growth was part of the plan. But Enlil's voice carried weight. He proposed sending sickness to reduce their numbers. The council agreed, and sickness came like a shadow over the cities. People weakened, fever burned in their skin, and families mourned. Offerings to the temples grew fewer, for many could not work the fields. E took pity. In secret he spoke to certain healers in dreams, telling them which herbs to use, which waters to boil, and which prayers to say. Slowly the sickness lifted. The people gave thanks to the gods, not knowing that Ea had been the one to save them. Enlil saw this and grew more determined. He sent drought, holding back the rains so the rivers shrank and the wells dried. Fields cracked under the sun, and hunger spread. Again Ea worked quietly, showing the people where to dig deep wells and how to store water in clay jars sealed against heat. They survived, though with difficulty. The council met once more. Enlil said that the humans could not be controlled by small measures. He proposed a final solution, a great flood to wash them from the face of the earth, leaving only silence and the gods' own peace. This time, even some who had hesitated before agreed with him. Ea remained silent in the council, for he knew that if he opposed them too strongly, they might turn against him. But in his heart, he planned to save at least a few. There was one man in the city of Shuruppak named Utnapishtim. He was wise and careful in his ways, a man who honored the gods but also listened closely to the signs in the world around him. Ea had watched him for many years and trusted his honesty. One night Ea spoke to him, not directly, for the law of the gods forbade telling mortals of the council's decision, but in the way of dreams and symbols. In the dream, Ea spoke through the reed wall of Utnapishtim's house. "Tear down your house and build a great boat. Leave your possessions. Save the seed of all living things. The boat must be strong, sealed with pitch, able to survive the storm that will come." Utnapishtim woke with his heart pounding. He understood that this was no ordinary dream. He began to work at once, gathering wood and calling skilled builders. He told his neighbors that the gods had cursed him and he must leave, so they would not suspect the truth. The boat rose tall and wide, with many rooms for storing food, water, and the seed of animals and plants. His family helped, and soon it was ready. When the signs in the sky grew strange, red clouds, sudden winds, and the air heavy with stillness, Utnapishtim led his family and the animals aboard. Ea sent a final whisper, "Shut the door." Utnapishtim obeyed, sealing it tight with pitch. Then the storm came. Black clouds covered the sky. Thunder roared, lightning split the heavens, and the wind howled like 1,000 voices. Rain poured down in sheets, and the rivers rose. The waters swallowed the fields, the houses, and finally, the walls of the cities. Even the tallest temple roofs disappeared under the flood. For 6 days and 6 nights the storm raged. On the 7th day, the wind grew still, and the rain stopped. The waters stretched far in every direction, and the world was silent. The boat drifted for many days until it came to rest on the side of a high mountain. Utnapishtim waited, sending out a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven. The raven did not return, and he knew the waters were falling. When the ground was dry enough, he opened the doors. His family stepped out into a clean, empty world. The air smelled fresh, but there was no sound except the wind. He built an altar and offered thanks to the gods. When the smoke of the offering reached the heavens, the gods gathered. Ea spoke first, praising Utnapishtim's wisdom. Enlil was at first angry that any human had survived, but Ea reminded him that the man was blameless and had done no harm. Enlil's anger softened, and he blessed Utnapishtim and his wife, giving them life without end in a faraway place where the rivers meet the sea. From that day, the gods swore never to send such a flood again. Instead, they would set limits in other ways, shortening human lives, sending seasons of hardship, but never destroying all. When the waters fully withdrew, people slowly returned to the lands. The survivors planted seeds, built houses, and raised their children. They told the story of the great flood, passing it to their children and their children's children, so none would forget. In the heavens, the Anunnaki returned to their duties. But the flood had changed the balance. The humans now feared the gods more deeply, and the gods watched the humans with greater caution. The bond between them remained, but it was no longer as free as before. Ea continued to walk among the people in secret, teaching them skills and keeping their trust. Enlil kept a firm watch, ready to act if the humans again grew too bold. Inanna returned to her cities, bringing festivals and music to lift the people's hearts after the long sorrow. Far below, in the underworld, Ereshkigal watched all of this with her quiet, shadowed eyes. She had not taken part in the flood, but she had welcomed the many new souls who came to her halls. She understood that life and death were always bound together, and she waited for the next turn of the world's story. After the flood, the world was quiet for many years. The rivers returned to their banks, and plants slowly covered the bare earth. The few people who had survived began to settle again near the water, building homes from reeds and mud. They planted seeds saved from before the flood, and their small fields of barley and wheat began to grow. The gods watched from above. Ea saw that the people were cautious, moving carefully in this new world, remembering the power of the waters. Enlil, satisfied that their numbers were small, no longer spoke of destroying them. Inanna visited the cities as they rose again, her presence bringing beauty and art back into human life. But as the years passed, the people began to dream of more than survival. They remembered the great cities of old and wanted to rebuild them. They shaped bricks from clay and laid them in strong walls. They carved canals to guide water to the fields. They gathered in groups to share work, food, and stories. One day, the gods met in council. They decided that the time had come to give humans rulers so their cities would be orderly and their people united. The first kings would not be ordinary men. They would be chosen by the gods, taught in the ways of leadership, and guided by divine wisdom. Enki, the wise and careful god, was chosen to deliver this gift. He visited a city called Kish, where the people had worked hard to rebuild after the flood. There he found a man named Jusha, known for his fairness and calm mind. Enki spoke to him in a dream. "Rise, Jusha. The gods have chosen you to lead your people. You will keep the balance between them and us. Rule with justice, honor the temples, and care for the land." When Jusha awoke, he felt the weight of this calling. He stood before the people and told them of the dream. They believed him, for his reputation was good, and they crowned him king. Thus began the first kingdom after the flood. Other cities followed. Kings arose in Uruk, in Ur, in Lagash, each claiming the favor of a god or goddess. Some ruled wisely, others sought only power. The gods watched closely, for the king's actions would shape the lives of many. Inanna favored Uruk, a city of wide streets, high walls, and grand temples. She chose a king there named Enmerkar, who was skilled with words and quick in thought. Under his rule, Uruk became a place of music, trade, and festivals. Inanna taught him how to write messages on clay tablets so he could send his words to faraway lands. Enmerkar dreamed of expanding his city's influence. Beyond the mountains lay a rich land called Arata, known for its precious stones and fine metalwork. Enmerkar sent messengers to demand tribute for the temple of Inanna. But the ruler of Arata was proud and refused. A long exchange began between the two cities. each sending messages carved in clay, each trying to outmatch the other with words and demands. Finally, Enmerkar sent an offer. If Arata would acknowledge Inanna as their goddess, Uruk would share its grain during the lean seasons. Arata, facing hunger after a poor harvest, agreed. Inanna's influence spread farther, and the wealth of Uruk grew. The gods saw how human ambition could stretch across the land. Some were pleased, for this brought greater offerings to the temples. Others feared that kings might grow too bold. Enlil warned that pride could lead to ruin, as it had before. Ib reminded him that guidance, not destruction, was the better path. In those days, the bond between gods and humans was still strong. The gods could walk openly in the streets, and people would bow and offer food or drink. At festivals, the gods would join in the feasts, their forms shining with a light that set them apart from mortals. It was said that sometimes a god or goddess would choose a mortal as a companion, blessing them with beauty, skill, or wisdom. Children born from such unions were often stronger or wiser than others, marked for special destinies. One such child was Lugalbanda, a prince of Uruk. His mother was mortal, but his father claimed descent from a god. From a young age, Lugalbanda was quick, clever, and brave. When Enmerkar led a campaign into distant lands, Lugalbanda joined him. But along the journey he fell ill and could not travel. Left in a mountain cave to recover, he prayed to the gods for help. Inanna heard him and sent a vision of a great bird, the Anzu, whose feathers shone like gold. Lugalbanda followed the signs in his dream and found the bird trapped in a hunter's net. He freed it, and in return the bird blessed him with speed, like the wind, and the strength to heal quickly. Lugalbanda rejoined the army and played a key role in their victory. His deeds became legend, and in time he would wear the crown of Uruk. The gods continued to choose leaders and guide them, but they also watched as humans learned to shape their own destiny. Writings spread, trade routes grew, and cities became centers of power. The more the people achieved, the more they began to see themselves as shapers of the world, not only servants of the gods. This shift did not go unnoticed. Enlil feared that humans might forget their place. Inanna saw opportunity. If humans grew strong, they could spread her worship farther. E remained the quiet guide, ensuring that wisdom was not lost in the rush for power. It was during this time that the first great alliances and rivalries formed between cities. War and peace both served the gods' purposes, for each outcome brought different offerings and honors. Some believed the gods played these games among themselves, using kings and armies as pieces on a board. In the underworld, Ereshkigal watched the growing world above. Though she ruled the realm of the dead, she understood that the living were always moving toward her halls. She did not interfere, but she kept the balance of her domain, making sure that every soul found its place. As the generations passed, the memory of the flood faded. New stories rose to take its place, tales of kings, of victories, of love and betrayal. Yet beneath it all, the old truth remained. The gods had shaped humanity, and their hands still rested on the fate of every city. But change was coming. A man would soon rise in Uruk whose name would echo for thousands of years. He would be part mortal, part divine, and his restless heart would lead him on a journey unlike any before. The gods watched closely, for they knew that his story would touch both heaven and the underworld, and perhaps even challenge the order they had built. In the city of Uruk, after the reign of Lugalbanda, a new king was born, one whose name would be remembered in both the songs of men and the whispers of the gods. His name was Gilgamesh. His father was said to be a mortal king, but his mother was Ninsun, a goddess known for her wisdom and dreams. This made Gilgamesh 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a mixture that gave him great strength, beauty, and intelligence. From the day he could walk, Gilgamesh was unlike other children. He ran faster than the wind, lifted stones heavier than 10 men could carry, and his eyes burned with a restless light. But with his gifts came a pride that sometimes made him harsh. As he grew into manhood and took the throne of Uruk, he ruled with a strong hand, building great walls and temples, but also testing the limits of his power over his people. The gods watched him closely. Enlil saw in him the seeds of both greatness and danger. Inanna admired his beauty and spirit, but knew his heart needed balance. Ea, ever the quiet guide, wondered how to shape him toward wisdom without breaking him. The people of Uruk, though proud of their king, began to whisper prayers to the gods, asking for relief from his unyielding ways. Their voices reached the heavens, and the gods decided to act, not by punishing Gilgamesh, but by giving him an equal, someone who could match his strength and temper his pride. From the clay of the earth, the goddess Aruru shaped a man. She gave him the wild strength of the animals, the speed of the deer, and the endurance of the great bull. This man was Enkidu, and he lived in the steppe with the creatures, drinking from rivers, running with gazelles, and knowing nothing of cities or kings. His hair was long and tangled, his skin rough from the sun, and his heart was pure, unshaped by human law. One day, a trapper saw Enkidu freeing animals from his snares. Angry at the loss, the trapper went to Uruk and told Gilgamesh about this wild man who roamed free, stronger than any hunter. Gilgamesh smiled, for he saw in this a challenge. He told the trapper to take a woman from the temple, one skilled in the ways of love and gentle words, to meet Enkidu. The woman was Shamat, a priestess who knew the ways of both gods and men. She travelled to the steppe and found Enkidu near a waterhole. She approached without fear, her presence calm and warm. When Enkidu saw her, he paused, curious, for she was unlike any creature he had met. Shamat spoke to him softly, telling him of the city, of food baked in ovens, of wine that warmed the heart, and of the music and laughter of human gatherings. She took his hand and led him into her tent. There she shared with him the closeness of human touch, the gentle rhythms of breath, and the deep union that joined hearts as well as bodies. In the old way of the gods, such union was not hidden but celebrated, for it brought life and connection. Enkidu felt a stirring in his heart, a new awareness of himself and the world. When he returned to the animals, they no longer welcomed him. The gazelles fled, and the wild beasts kept their distance. Shamat told him this was because he had crossed into the realm of humans. "You are no longer only of the wild," she said. "Come with me to Uruk. There you will find food, clothing, and friendship. There you will meet the king, Gilgamesh." Enkidu agreed, and together they journeyed to the city. Along the way, Shamat taught him how to eat bread and drink wine, how to wash himself, and how to wear clothing. She told him of the temples and the gods, of festivals and markets. Enkidu listened, eager to learn, though he still missed the freedom of the open steppe. When they reached Uruk, news of the wild man's arrival spread quickly. Gilgamesh, curious and excited, came to meet him. The two men stood face to face, each measuring the other. Without a word, they grappled, their strength shaking the walls of the city. They wrestled until the ground beneath them cracked, until the people held their breath in fear. But neither could defeat the other. Finally, they stepped back, both laughing, for each had found an equal. From that day, Gilgamesh and Enkidu became friends as close as brothers. They walked the streets together, trained in the fields together, and shared their dreams and plans. Gilgamesh's pride softened, and the people of Uruk saw a change in their king. But Gilgamesh was still restless. One evening he told Enkidu of a great challenge. In the far forest, he said, grows the sacred cedar, guarded by Humbaba, a monster placed there by Enlil. I would go there and cut down the cedar to make great gates for Uruk. Will you come with me? Enkidu hesitated, for he knew the forest and feared Humbaba's power. But his loyalty to Gilgamesh was strong. If you go, I will go, he said, but we must seek the blessing of the gods. They went to the temple of Ninsun, Gilgamesh's mother. She prayed to Shamash, the sun god, to protect them on their journey. She blessed Enkidu as her own son, asking him to stand beside Gilgamesh as a shield. The two friends set out, carrying axes and swords, walking for days until they reached the edge of the great cedar forest. The air there was thick with the scent of resin, and the trees rose so high they seemed to touch the sky. From deep within came the roar of Humbaba. They entered the forest, their hearts steady but alert. When Humbaba appeared, his face was like a storm, his eyes flashing like lightning. The ground shook beneath his steps. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought together, striking with their weapons, calling on Shamash for help. The sun god sent winds to bind Humbaba, and with their strength combined, they brought the guardian down. Before dying, Humbaba pleaded for mercy, but they remembered the task they had sworn to complete. They cut down the great cedar and carried it back to Uruk, where they built mighty gates for the city and offered thanks to the gods. Their victory brought them fame, but it also caught the attention of Inanna. She admired Gilgamesh's strength and beauty and came to him with gifts, asking him to be her husband. But Gilgamesh refused, reminding her of how she had treated her past lovers. Inanna's pride was wounded, and she went to her father, Anu, demanding the bull of heaven to punish him. The bull descended, shaking the earth, causing rivers to rise and fields to wither. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought it together, striking it down. But this act angered the gods. They met in council and decided that one of the heroes must pay for killing the bull. Enlil declared that Enkidu must die. The decision was final, for the word of the gods could not be undone. Soon after, Enkidu fell ill. He dreamed of the underworld, of the darkness that awaited him. Gilgamesh stayed by his side, but no prayer or offering could change the fate set by the gods. When Enkidu breathed his last, Gilgamesh's grief was deep. He tore his clothes, covered himself in dust, and wandered the city in mourning. For the first time he faced the truth that even the strongest man could not escape death. This thought would drive him on a new journey, one that would take him beyond the edges of the known world, seeking a way to defeat death itself. The gods watched, knowing this path would test him more than any battle ever had. The death of Enkidu left Gilgamesh empty. His palace, his treasures, his victories, none of them could fill the hollow space where his friend had been. He wandered through the streets of Uruk like a shadow, refusing food, refusing sleep. The laughter of the people felt far away. Even the towering walls he had built seemed like fragile things compared to the silence of the grave. Night after night, he lay awake thinking about what Enkidu had said in his last days, the dream of the underworld, the land where dust was food and clay was meat, where kings sat beside beggars, all equal in death. Gilgamesh's heart filled with fear. He was 2/3 god, yes, but that 1/3 human meant death would claim him too. One night, as the wind rattled through the streets, he rose and wrapped himself in a lion's skin. He made a vow to himself. I will not accept the fate of all men. I will find the one who escaped death. I will find Utnapishtim, who survived the great flood and was granted eternal life by the gods. He will tell me how I too may live forever. He left Uruk without ceremony, traveling on foot through the wilderness. He crossed rivers, climbed hills, and pushed through thorny thickets. His hair grew tangled, his skin hardened under the sun, and his fine robes became rags. He no longer looked like a king, but like a hunter or a wanderer. After many days he came to the edge of the twin mountains, Mashu, whose peaks touched the sky. These were the gates to the path the sun took each day, guarded by two great beings, scorpion men. Their bodies were half man, half scorpion, their faces fierce, their stingers curled over their backs. They stood watch over the rising and setting of the sun, letting no mortal pass without cause. When Gilgamesh approached, the scorpion man's wife saw him first. "Look," she said to her husband, "one comes to us, but he is no ordinary man. 2/3 of him is like the gods." The scorpion man stepped forward. "Who are you, traveler, and why have you come to the mountains of the sun?" Gilgamesh bowed his head respectfully. "I am Gilgamesh of Uruk. I seek Utnapishtim, who lives beyond the waters of death. I have lost my friend and now fear my own end. Tell me how to reach him." The scorpion man frowned. "The path you asked to take is the road the sun travels each night under the world. It is dark, with no light for 12 double hours. No mortal can walk it and live."
"I will walk it," Gilgamesh said firmly. "Even if I fall, I will not stop."
The scorpion man studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "If you wish to perish, the choice is yours, but know this. Once you enter, there will be no light until the 12th hour. Walk without fear." Gilgamesh entered the tunnel. At once, darkness swallowed him. He could not see his own hands, but he kept moving, counting each step. The air was heavy, and the silence pressed on him. At the first hour, he could still feel the stone beneath his feet. At the 6th hour, his legs ached, but he did not stop. By the 12th hour, he saw a faint glow ahead, and at last he stepped out into the light of a garden, unlike any he had known. The trees here grew jewels instead of fruit. Rubies shone like pomegranates, emeralds hung like clusters of grapes, and lapis lazuli glimmered like dates in the sun. The grass sparkled, and the air was sweet. There he met a woman named Siduri, the keeper of the garden and a maker of fine wine. When she saw Gilgamesh, she was startled by his ragged appearance. "Why have you come here, stranger, looking as though death itself follows you?" "I seek Utnapishtim," Gilgamesh said. "Tell me where to find him." Siduri shook her head. "No man can cross the waters of death to reach him. Go back to your city, Gilgamesh. Eat good bread, drink fine wine, love your family, and accept the life the gods have given you." But Gilgamesh refused. "I will not go back until I find the secret of eternal life." Seeing his determination, Siduri told him to find Urshanabi, the boatman who served Utnapishtim. Gilgamesh went to the shore where Urshanabi kept his craft. The boatman was gathering strange stones from the shore when Gilgamesh appeared. Mistaking them for a threat, Gilgamesh smashed the stones with his axe. Urshanabi cried out, "Fool! Those stones could carry my boat across the waters of death. Without them, we must cut new poles, and each pole can be used only once before the waters eat it away." So Gilgamesh helped him cut hundreds of long poles from the forest. Together they loaded the boat and pushed off. They sailed until they reached the waters of death, black and still, where no wind blew. Urshanabi warned him, "Do not touch the water, or it will claim you." Gilgamesh stood at the front of the boat, pushing with pole after pole. One by one he threw them away until they were gone. At last they reached the far shore where Utnapishtim's home stood.
Utnapishtim was not what Gilgamesh expected. He looked like an ordinary man, not a god. "Why have you come here, Gilgamesh?" he asked.
Gilgamesh told him of Enkidu's death and his own fear of dying. "You were granted eternal life," he said. "Tell me how I can have it too." Utnapishtim sighed. "I will tell you a secret the gods once kept. Long ago, the gods decided to send a great flood to wipe out mankind. Ea, who made men, did not wish them to perish. So he came to me in a dream, warning me to build a great boat. I filled it with my family, craftsmen, animals of every kind, and seeds of all the plants. When the flood came, it covered the world for many days. Even the gods were afraid of its power. When the waters finally fell, my boat came to rest on a mountain. I released a dove, a swallow, and a raven. The raven did not return, and I knew the waters were gone. We offered sacrifices, and the gods came. Enlil, seeing that I had lived, was angry, but Ea spoke for me. Then Enlil blessed me and my wife, granting us life without end. But Gilgamesh, that was a gift for us alone. The gods will not give it to another." Gilgamesh's shoulders sank. "Then all my journey has been for nothing?" "Not entirely," Utnapishtim said. "If you can stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights, perhaps you can show the strength needed for such a gift." Gilgamesh agreed, but as soon as he sat down, sleep overcame him. He slept for 7 nights, and Utnapishtim's wife baked a loaf of bread each day to mark the time. When Gilgamesh awoke, he saw the loaves lined up, some fresh, some stale. He knew he had failed. Still, Utnapishtim's wife felt pity for him. She asked her husband to tell Gilgamesh of a plant that grew at the bottom of the sea, a plant that could restore youth. Gilgamesh tied stones to his feet, dove into the deep, and brought up the plant. He planned to share it with the elders of Uruk so they could be young again. But on the journey home, he stopped to bathe in a cool spring. As he washed, a serpent smelled the plant, came up from the water, and took it away.
As it slithered off, it shed its skin, renewed in youth. Gilgamesh sat on the shore, staring at the empty water, knowing the gift was gone.
Weary, he returned to Uruk. He climbed its walls and looked out at the city he had built. It was not eternal life, but it was something that would outlast him. And in that moment he understood, though he could not live forever, his deeds, his city, and his story would live in the hearts of men for generations. Far above, the gods watched in silence. Enlil nodded, Inanna smiled faintly, and Ea whispered, "This is how a mortal becomes eternal, through the memory of his name." The news of Gilgamesh's return to Uruk spread faster than the river's current. People poured into the streets, eager to see their king once again. He looked older, leaner, and his eyes carried the depth of a man who had walked through deserts, fought monsters, and stood in the presence of the gods. The people cheered, for their city was still strong under his rule, and the king they once feared had now become one they deeply respected. Gilgamesh called his builders and scribes together. "Let us make Uruk a place that will never be forgotten," he said. He ordered new walls to be raised, stronger and higher than before, built from baked brick and set with shining stones. The gates were carved with the stories of the city, and above them were scenes of the flood, the gods, and his own journeys. He wanted every person who passed through Uruk to remember that they were part of a city shaped by divine hand. The temples were repaired and filled with offerings. Inanna's shrine glowed with gold and lapis, and the priests sang her praises at dawn and sunset. Ea's wisdom was honored in the scribes' halls, where clay tablets were kept safe in rows of shelves. The city's markets filled with goods from far lands, spices from the east, copper from the mountains, wool from the plains. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, Gilgamesh would walk alone on the walls, gazing at the stars. He thought of Enkidu, whose laughter once echoed beside him. He thought of Utnapishtim, who held the secret of eternal life, but could not give it. He understood now that no wall, no treasure, no act of strength could hold back time. But he also saw that deeds and stories could live on long after a man's body was gone. The gods, watching from above, spoke among themselves. Enlil saw that Gilgamesh had grown wise and no longer sought to challenge their authority. Inanna smiled upon Uruk, pleased that her city was thriving. Ea noted that wisdom had taken root in the king's heart. Years passed, and Gilgamesh ruled with fairness and care. He resolved disputes with calm words rather than force. He protected the farmers' fields, ensured that water flowed through the canals, and kept the roads safe for traders. His strength remained, but he now used it for the good of his people, not for his own glory. In those days, the bond between gods and humans began to shift again. The gods no longer walked as openly in the streets, but their presence was still felt. In the blessings on the harvest, in the dreams that guided kings, in the sudden fortune or misfortune that came without warning. People learned to read omens in the flight of birds, the patterns of smoke, and the shape of clouds. As Uruk's fame grew, other cities took notice. Some sent envoys bearing gifts, seeking friendship. Others grew jealous and began to whisper of war. Gilgamesh, remembering the lessons of his journey, sought peace where he could. But he also trained his soldiers, knowing that the world was not free of danger. One summer, a great drought struck the land. The rivers shrank, the fields cracked under the sun, and the people grew fearful. Gilgamesh prayed to Ea for guidance, and in a dream the god showed him a vision of the mountains far to the north, where clear water still flowed. Without delay, Gilgamesh led an expedition to carve a new canal that would bring this water to Uruk. The work was long and hard, but when the first cool stream reached the city, the people rejoiced. They gave thanks to both king and gods. It was said that during this time a woman came to Uruk claiming to be the daughter of a goddess. She was tall, with eyes like the deep night sky, and she spoke in a voice that seemed to hold music. Some believed she was sent by Inanna herself to bless the city. Gilgamesh welcomed her, and she brought with her songs, stories, and dances that enchanted the people. Whether mortal or divine, her presence made the city's festivals more splendid than ever before. But time moves forward, even for kings. Gilgamesh grew older. His hair, once dark and thick, turned silver. His body, though still strong, began to feel the weight of years. He appointed wise officials to share the burden of ruling and trained his sons in the duties of leadership. He knew that when his time came, Uruk would need to stand without him. The end came not in battle, but in a quiet sickness. As he lay in his chambers, the people of Uruk gathered outside, filling the streets in silence. The priests offered prayers to the gods, but even they knew that no mortal can escape death. Gilgamesh looked upon the walls he had built, the temples he had restored, the people he had guided. He knew his life had not been in vain. When he breathed his last, the city mourned for many days. His body was laid to rest in a great tomb beneath the Euphrates, hidden so well that none could disturb it. Offerings of food, drink, weapons, and treasures were placed within, so he would have all he needed in the next world. The gods marked his passing with signs. A great star blazed in the sky, and the river rose slightly, as if to honor him. In the underworld, Ereshkigal received him with dignity, for he was a king who had touched both divine and mortal realms. After Gilgamesh, Uruk continued to thrive. Kings came and went, each adding their own mark to the city. But his name remained carved into stone and pressed into clay, remembered in stories told by travelers, scribes, and priests. He had sought immortality in life and found it instead in memory. The Anunnaki, too, endured. Though they no longer walked as they once did among humans, their influence was felt in every temple and in every king's court. They had shaped the world after the flood, guided the rise of cities, and watched the unfolding of human history. And they knew that as long as people looked to the heavens in wonder, their presence would never be forgotten. But far away, beyond the lands of Sumer, other peoples were building their own cities, telling their own stories of gods and heroes. The Anunnaki watched with curiosity, wondering how far their reach might extend, and whether the world they had helped to shape would one day grow beyond even their power. The days after Gilgamesh's passing were filled with quiet reflection in Uruk. Life continued, but the people felt as if a great light had gone out. In the evenings, families gathered under the open sky and told the story of the king who had walked with the gods, who had fought beasts and crossed seas, who had sought the secret of eternal life and returned with the wisdom to rule well. The elders told the children, "Remember this. Strength will fade, but a name and deeds live on in the mouths of those who speak them." The scribes wrote his life onto fresh clay tablets, pressing the marks deep so that the rains of centuries could not wash them away. They placed these tablets in sealed jars, hidden in the archives of the temple, knowing that one day, a time far beyond their own, someone might find them and learn the old tales again. In the high places, the Anunnaki watched and listened. They spoke of the long road they had walked alongside humans. Anu, father of the gods, remembered the first shaping of clay, the first spark of life. Enlil, who had once brought the flood to cleanse the earth, now looked upon the cities and fields with a quieter heart. Ea, who had taught the arts of writing, building, and law, saw the rippling effect of his gifts spreading far beyond Sumer's borders. Inanna, restless and bright, moved among the cities like a hidden wind. Sometimes she appeared as a queen whose beauty swayed kings, sometimes as a warrior whose presence could turn a battle, sometimes as a nameless singer in the market whose voice made strangers stop in their tracks. She kept her face in the hearts of mortals, for she thrived on their love, their longing, and even their sorrow. But change was coming, slow as the shifting of rivers. In distant lands, people were crafting their own gods, their own stories of beginnings and endings. The Anunnaki began to sense that their direct hand in shaping the world was fading. Mortals had learned to govern themselves, to record their own histories, and to make their own choices without constant divine instruction. Some of the younger gods whispered that it was time to step fully into the hidden realms, leaving the world to its own course. Others argued that their presence should remain, for without the gods, humans might lose their way. The debate went on in the shining halls above the world, but no final choice was made. Meanwhile, the rivers still rose and fell with the seasons. The fields of barley turned gold under the sun, and the herds grazed under the watch of shepherds. Traders moved between cities with carts and boats, bringing not only goods, but also news and tales from far-off places. Life carried on as it always had, under the endless sky. One year, a great comet blazed across the heavens. The priests took it as a sign and sent messages to the temples of other cities. They met in council, each bringing records of omens, dreams, and visions. They agreed that the comet marked a turning of the age. What had been before would not be as it was again. And so the temples began to send their teachings farther, instructing travelers to carry the old knowledge to foreign lands. The names of the Anunnaki spread in strange tongues, their deeds reshaped to fit new peoples. In some places, Enlil became a sky father with another name. In others, Inanna's stories were woven into the tales of love and war for different goddesses. The essence of the Anunnaki endured, though their names were changed, like clay pressed into new forms. He, wise in the ways of the deep, took it upon himself to hide certain secrets so that they would not be lost. He spoke to the rivers, the mountains, and the wind, placing whispers in their currents that only the attentive could hear. When the time is right, he said, these truths will be found again. In the mortal world, kings rose and fell. Some honored the gods, building great ziggurats that reached toward the stars. Others cared only for their own power and their reigns ended quickly. The people learned that cities could be strong, but they could also crumble if the balance between the divine and the human was forgotten. One tale tells of a shepherd from the edge of the desert who claimed that the gods had spoken to him in a dream. He built a small altar of stones, poured out water, and gave thanks to the unseen. His children carried this practice into new lands, and in time, entire peoples came to worship in this simpler way, without temples, without grand offerings, but with hearts turned to the sky. The Anunnaki saw this and understood that their legacy was changing shape again. The earth itself kept memory in its bones. Deep beneath the layers of soil, the remnants of old cities lay silent. Baked bricks, carved stones, tools, and vessels. These would wait through ages until hands in a far future would uncover them and wonder about the people who had made them, the gods they had served, and the stories they had believed.
And in the realm of the dead, Ereshkigal's halls remained steady. She ruled without favoritism, taking both king and commoner into her shadowed courts.
Yet even she knew the names of the great ones, and when Gilgamesh's name was spoken, it was with the respect due to a man who had dared to seek the truths of both worlds. As the ages rolled forward, the Anunnaki's role became less like rulers and more like distant guardians. They rarely intervened openly, but from time to time a dream would stir a leader's heart, a sudden thought would save a city, or a strange traveler would appear to give counsel and vanish before dawn. In these quiet ways, they still shaped the course of things. Inanna, ever unwilling to fade, ensured that love, desire, and ambition remained powerful forces in the human heart. Enlil watched over the winds and storms, steering them when the balance of the land was at risk. Isaac continued to guard wisdom, sometimes allowing it to surface in the mind of a scribe or a wandering thinker. It is said that the Anunnaki meet once every 1,000 years in a place beyond the sky to share what they have seen. They speak of the rise and fall of empires, of the slow spread of knowledge, of the endless weaving of human fate. And always they return to the same question. How much of the world's course should they guide, and how much should they leave to human hands? The answer is never final, for the story is never finished. Some believe that even now the Anunnaki walk the earth in hidden form, testing hearts, guiding the worthy, and keeping the old ways alive in secret. Others say they have withdrawn entirely, leaving only the stars as their silent watchers. And some say that when the world reaches a great turning again, when the rivers change course, the skies burn with signs, and the hearts of men cry out for guidance, the Anunnaki will return as they once were, in full power and glory. Until that day, their story rests in the memory of the earth, in the whispers of the wind, and in the dreams that come unbidden to those who listen. And so it is told, from the shaping of man out of clay, to the days of the great flood, to the reigns of mighty kings and the fading of the gods, the Anunnaki have been present. They shaped the beginning, and though they may seem far away now, they remain in the pattern of the world. For as long as rivers flow, as long as the sun rises over the fields, and as long as a voice somewhere speaks their names, the Anunnaki endure. Their story is not just a tale of gods and kings, it is the story of humanity itself, walking between earth and sky, carrying both dust and divinity in the same hands, and in that perhaps lies the truest gift they gave. And so, dear listener, our journey with the Anunnaki comes to a quiet close. From the first breath drawn from the clay to the great kings who sought the secrets of life, to the slow fading of the gods into the hidden places of the world, their story lingers. The Anunnaki remind us that power rises and falls, but the true immortality lies in the memories we leave behind, the kindness we give, and the wisdom we share. Though their temples may crumble, and their names be spoken in many tongues, they live on, in the stories told beneath the stars, in the wind that brushes your cheek, in the dreams that stir your soul. Perhaps as you rest tonight, one of them will walk the quiet corridors of your dreams, not as a mighty god on a golden throne, but as a gentle guide, reminding you that you too are made of both earth and sky. Sleep well. And remember, every ending is just the beginning of another chapter waiting to be told.